and disturbed the little ones, sometimes killing them or cutting off the legs of the mother hen, was very disturbing to me. I remember at one time when John Matthews, one of my best friends, and I were hunting in the fields. And this was in the fall of the year, after the crops were in. I think the frost was on the ground. And we were hunting some birds, I think it was pheasants. And at that time we saw some pheasants, and I started to shoot, and John was in front of me, and I remember him crossing over in front of me and me shooting right over his shoulder, right next to his head. And it scared us both so badly that it spoiled the day for us, and we quit and went home. It was a very close call for John to jump in front of me as I was shooting at the pheasants. In the front room of our home, we were unable to heat all the house in the wintertime, and so that was fenced off or blocked off, and we used that for storage purposes. And I remember in that front room of the old home that we stored apples and other food. And Paul and I were guilty of doing something that was rather unorthodox, certainly. In the wintertime, we went in there and we found a lot of rotten apples, and so we used the wallpaper, the old wallpaper on the walls, as targets. We threw these rotten apples at the targets on the wall. And I remember our father thought that this was really unnecessary to use the front room for this particular purpose. In the late summer, a comparatively new invention was used to harvest the grain. It was certainly much better and faster than the scythe or the flail. It was a machine used to cut the grain, put them in bundles, and tie them. It was called a binder. 3 head of horses were used to pull this equipment. Wallace Budge cut grain for others for many years. He did custom work for others, and I'm sure he cut thousands and thousands of acres. The grain was then put in shocks. The bundles were stood up in a leaning position. Several were put together in a circle so that the bundles could support each other. And the grain heads would be on top so that they would be allowed to dry and further ripen. Especially in damp weather, this was important. And of course, it would also make room so that you could drive the horse-drawn wagons through the fields on the open stubble to be loaded. With a 3-tine pitchfork, we could then toss the bundles onto the wagon to be loaded with the grain heads inside. If the bundles were ever placed or loaded on the wagon with the heads on the outside, for sure you'd lose your load of grain because they would be the heaviest part and they would slide off, and that has happened many times. The grain would then be hauled in and the bundles tossed onto a large round stack. There could be several stacks in 2 rows with about an 8-foot clearance in between, so that the thresher could go in between the stacks of grain and it could be fed from both sides. When possible, the neighbors would borrow each other's wagons and load up as many as they had, and they would feed from the wagons instead of making so many stacks, thus handling the grain fewer times. The thresher would receive the grain on a revolving belt of slats pulled by chains. and this was on an inclined chute. The knives and choppers would shred the bundles, and the grain, being the heaviest, would fall into chutes down the lower part of the threshing machine to be sacked in burlap sacks, and the light straw on the chaff would be blown out along a long swingable 12-inch pipe, and this would transfer the straw to make a straw stack. And this big boom or pipe through which the straw would travel could be moved from side to side in order to make the stack any distance or any width that you wanted to make it. Fred Gorner of North Ogden and the Etherington twin brothers, Rule and Roll of Plain City, were two of the threshing outfits who did custom threshing work in Pleasant View. On threshing days, a big feast of food was always prepared and served. The threshers, as well as the neighbors who took turns in helping each other, at dinner time would wash up outside the house in big tubs of water. The men and boys would lean over the tubs and scrub and wash and use soap and clean themselves up, because threshing was a very dusty and somewhat dirty job. In family style, a feast of plenty was then served, and these were certainly special days for the men, boys, housewives, daughters, and lots of neighbors. I attended my first senior high school year at the old Ogden High School that's located on 25th Street and Monroe Boulevard. This was in 1926 and 27. There wasn't any Weber County high school at that time, and the Ogden High had been known to be large enough to accommodate both the Ogden Senior High School students and all of the students in the communities in Weber County, as all boys were required to enroll in the ROTC, which is the Reserved Officers Training Corps. I joined, and we dressed in Army uniforms. We had a captain-type hat, an Army uniform with rolled leggings on our legs. I joined the ROTC band as a beginner, and later on we marched down Monroe and 25th Street many times, miles and miles, in learning to march as a marching band. They'd employed a new leader for the band that year, Hiram Lammers. He had been recently with the famous Sousa's band and was playing trombone. He revolutionized the band in real fast order, and he patterned it after his band master or leader that he had been with for many years, the world famous John Philip Sousa, and how he operated his band. He taught us some of the tricks that he had learned from John Philip Sousa, who is the greatest band man of all time. We practiced on the old Ogden High stage, first thing in the morning before school, because music in those days wasn't scheduled into a class, and in fact no time was allocated during class time for music at all. As I was a beginner, I received help from High Lammers himself, and he was an articulate and talented musician. He showed me his own trombone, which he played in Sousa's band. It was a bass trombone. It was a C.G. Kahn, brass in finish, and it was a bass with a C valve. And then he let me use it to develop my lung power. And later, I became the bass trombonist in this famous Ogden High School band of 1926 and used his instrument. Later, I bought it. Noticeably, he had some misgivings and showed quite a degree of reluctance to part with his famous trombone, as it had sentimental values to him, and it is the bass trombone that you see in most of the pictures of Sousa's band. I still have this beautiful, aged, brass bass trombone, and it is now a family artifact and treasure. We worked and practiced religiously that year. High Lammers was a severe and exacting musician. We learned to read his lips, his fingertips, body gestures, and every one of the multitude of facial expressions. Sousa's band came to the Salt Lake Tabernacle during this particular school year. This was a real opportunity for us all to be taken down to hear Sousa and his band firsthand. Prior to the concert, we were invited to meet and shake hands with Sousa and all his musicians. When High Lammers appeared, a grand reunion and an embracing took place with all Sousa's men. Sousa talked with us personally and praised High Lammers. Then he commented about his various players, particularly the bass drummer, a white-haired elderly man, and he introduced him as having been with him from the very beginning. He was considered the most valuable single musician in the band, and Sousa said, "He is my pulse. He keeps the band together." We went backstage under the beneath the organ and observed the players warming up. Long tones, practicing special cadenzas and so forth. And then we went out in the main assembly, the tabernacle, and heard this wonderful concert. It was really the greatest. At the close, there was a standing ovation and applause. And the audience indicated that the high degree of appreciation that they had for the world's greatest band and its famous director, John Philip Sousa, known as the band king of all time. We were invited to the National High School Band Contest in Fostoria, Ohio, in June, the next spring. We worked hard prior to this, and the Rotary Club of Ogden pledged financial support. And for the money that I needed, R.T. Reese, Mildred's father, advanced money to me to be paid back when I would be working in the bees later on. All of Ogden was enthusiastic, especially as the day of departure came for us to board a special car on the Union Pacific Railroad A big cheering crowd gave us a real royal send-off. In Chicago, we marched down the street and played a concert later in the evening, and in the Tribune building, I believe it was. At the end of our 2,000-mile journey, we arrived in Fostoria, Ohio, early in the morning. We were the first band to arrive, and the homes were opened up to us. They had very few hotels for all the boys that were coming from all over the nation. And so the boys stayed in private homes. And the cars, many of them that you would see, would have a sign in the window, "Hop in, band boy." And all we were required to do is to thumb a ride, and they were expected to stop and take us any place we wanted to go. And so we did take advantage of that. And from the arrival on this early June the 2nd morning, through the contest days of June the 4th and 5th, 1926, till we departed, the news media headlined the big occasion, and the Ogden Band received much more than its proportionate share of publicity and write-ups. Reading from some of the news articles from the Fostoria Review, their headlines were "National Contest Unofficially Opens with the Arrival of Ogden, Utah Band Early This Morning. 5 bands will arrive in city tomorrow, with Houston, Texas heading the list at 5 a.m. Concert by Ogden Band tonight." And then it continues, "The big National Band Contest was unofficially opened here this morning with the arrival in Fostoria of the Ogden, Utah Band, the first of the many competing organizations from all sections of the country to appear on the scene. This band is an ROTC organization of high school students, and they present a very neat appearance in their snug-fitting Army uniforms and Sam Browne belts. The official party with the band includes Captain C.J. Dockler of the Army Reserves, Director Hiram Lammers and wife, Principal of the Ogden City Schools, A.M. Merrill and wife, Miss Marion Ewer, sponsor of the band, and her mother, and Darrell J. Greenwell, managing editor of the Ogden Standard-Examiner. Parents of several of the band boys who came on the special or will arrive tomorrow are, and they mention several names including Mr. Charles Empey and his wife, and Mr. and Mrs. George Glenn, who had a great deal to do with through the Rotarian organization of helping to finance the trip. It also mentions Elmer Kellstrom, who is the assistant director. The train arrived in Fostoria at 5:15 this morning, and the 2 Pullman coaches were shunted to a side track where the young musicians were allowed to sleep until 7 o'clock. At that time, the reception and special committees visited the cars, greeted the Utah travelers, and escorted them downtown to the restaurants for breakfast. Their baggage and instruments were transported to the high school building and placed in a private room assigned to them. Following breakfast, the boys were taken to the high school building and later taken to the various homes about the city, where they will be guests during their stay in Fostoria. Representatives of the Band Boosters Committee were on hand this morning when the train arrived in the city, and within a few minutes the following telegram was singing its way back toward Utah over the wires to relieve the natural worry and concern of parents and friends of the boys who were unable to accompany them. It was addressed to the city editor of the Standard-Examiner, and said, "Your high school band just arrived. All is fine. Fostoria hopes to show them a good time." It's signed by the committee. Although the Ogden Band will be in the Fostoria 2 days before the official opening of the contest, enjoying a necessary rest after the long journey, they are too full of life and pep to remain idle, as shown by the prompt response to a suggestion that a concert be played this evening. The concert will be held at the high school auditorium tonight and undoubtedly will cause an outpouring of Fostoria music lovers. Much more was said. And then the next day, the headlines in big print said, Ogden Band arouses much enthusiasm with splendid concert. Everyone is pleased. Speakers credit Fostoria with fine spirit and unlimited hospitality, and the Ogden Band will certainly be a real contender in the nationwide contest for the championship to be held here tomorrow and Saturday at the high school auditorium. This was demonstrated last night when the organization played a wonderful concert to the audience of about 800 music lovers. W.D. Kuhn, well-known local musician, said, "They had the most wonderful attack I've ever heard of any band. The program was one which would delight any lover of band music, covering a wide range of selections, and the young musicians seemed equally at home with all kinds of music played. The audience assembled with the expectation of hearing something worthwhile, feeling that a band coming as far as they did to enter a contest must of necessity be a real band. But before many strains had been played, many began to feel that the band was better than they had expected, and it is safe to say that everyone in the audience felt before the program was half done that this is one of the bands that will win a prize, and quite possibly the grand prize. The band is well balanced, every department apparently being absolutely dependable. The trombone section showed an advantage never excelled in Fostoria before in playing Lass's trombone." It goes on to mention several things and told about the program that we played, and that we were a mighty clean-looking bunch of young men, and they welcomed us in Fostoria with their open arms. The bands that competed in the National High School Band Contest were Ogden, Utah, Houston, Texas, Lowell, Massachusetts, Marion, Indiana, Lockport, New York, Louisville, Kentucky, Paw Paw, Michigan, Joliet, Illinois, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Estabula Harbor, Ohio, Flint, Michigan, Council Bluffs, Iowa, and Fostoria, Ohio, who were the present national champions. The contest ended with Joliet, Illinois receiving first place, Fostoria, Ohio second place, and Ogden, Utah third place. Louisville, Kentucky fourth. The trophies were real wonderful, and the Ogden boys received bronze medals, individual bronze medals for the national contest. This event was acclaimed to be the biggest event of its kind ever held. Now, we were so well received in Fostoria that when the time came to leave, at the conclusion of this national band contest, I can truly say that our stay had been really wonderful, but almost too short. We returned by the way of Denver to play a concert there at the International Rotary Convention that was in session in this city at that time. We first of all played a concert in front of the office on the street of the Denver Post. And later we played for the International Rotarians, whose representatives came from all parts of the world. Being ROTC members, are members of the Reserve Officers Training Corps, and in Army attire, we stayed at the Army Fitzsimmons General Hospital. And in the vacant part, we stayed in the empty rooms that were called the kickoff ward, where the soldiers, right after World War I, were placed before they passed away. We enjoyed our stay there, had quite a lot of freedom. We enjoyed the large helpings of Army chow at the mess call, and the big dishes of food, big mammoth pitchers with milk and water, and this was served, at least to us, family style. And we wrestled and we climbed the water tower and we teased a pet bear in spare time. We returned to Ogden by the way of the Royal Gorge on the Rio Grande Railroad. This was a real fine experience, to come home a different way. And for most of us boys, this trip had been one that none of us had ever taken before, so far away from home and such a long trip. When we did arrive, we had a real greeting at the Union Pacific Railroad in Ogden. And after we did return, the Rotary Club went the extra mile again and entertained the boys with a special luncheon. And I think this was held, if I remember correctly, in the Hotel Ben Lomond. Others learned of our successes and our recognitions, and so we were invited to go to Salt Lake City and play. And I remember they gave us a free luncheon down there at the Hotel Utah. And they served us shrimp cocktail, and I remember that that was the first time I'd ever seen it, and I thought there was little worms. They were little white worms, or grubs, in ketchup. And I didn't eat them. And then later on we were invited to go to Boise, Idaho. This was a small community then, and we played concerts up there. We were invited to see anything in the city that we wanted to see, and some of us decided we'd like to have the experience of going to the state penitentiary. And this we did, and they opened up these mammoth steel gates, and it was a rather frightening experience to hear those big gates clang shut behind us as we entered. We saw the prisoners in prison and saw things that we certainly didn't want to experience ourselves. A Negro was in solitary confinement, and he was kept in the dark until his eyes couldn't stand the light. And the only time he did come out where it was light is when they gave him his food. And this was a real experience to all of us, and I think none of the boys ever forgotten that experience of visiting the prisoners in a penitentiary. In my book of clippings and pictures of this great Ogden High School band of 1926, this is probably the most complete and comprehensive collection of any in existence. 25 years later, on June the 20th, 1951, on a Wednesday evening at the Ogden Golf and Country Club, an Ogden High School band reunion for this famous band and its members and directors and others was held for the purpose of renewing friendships, and especially to do honor and tribute to our director, Hiram Lammers, who had come in from California, from the RKO studios where he had been employed. We had a real fine evening, and I'm sure that everyone enjoyed it. However, some interesting things did take place. When each of us were asked to give a review of what had happened to us in 25 years, it was really interesting to hear